Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers, and every single click counts. And today's Commander deck list is going to be focused around Eomer, Marshal of Rohan. For 2 colorless and 2 red, it's a legendary creature human knight 4/4 with haste, and whenever one or more attacking legendary creatures you control die, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this is a really cool commander that requires a little bit of build around. You're obviously going to want to have a very heavy legendary focus because it's asking you to do that, but you also definitely need to include a lot of sack outlets in order to be able to take advantage of his ability. It is limited somewhat by the fact that you can only do it once per turn, but there are plenty of ways to get around that, as you will soon see. So it is very easy to combo off with this given the right board state. We do have a couple of ways to protect our commander because of that, seeing as he's going to be a high priority target for most opponents, and this just seems like a pretty fun deck that can really go off or play a more kind of fair game by just attacking repeatedly. And just as a quick heads up before we get started, I made this deck because one of my viewers left a comment requesting me to do so. So if you would like to see a deck for a specific commander that I haven't yet done, feel free to leave me a message, and if possible I will do that. So anyway, starting off we have Amber Gristle O'Maul. This is going to be a pretty decent card in a deck that's focused around attacking like ours is. It does require you to discard your hand, but we're a red deck, we don't have that much card advantage anyway, and with this in play, if we're attacking 3 opponents, we get to draw 3 cards, and obviously you're going to be doing this when you already have a fairly empty hand. It's also a legendary, and it's one we don't feel too bad about sacrificing to other stuff. An Axe Hardened in the Forge is perfect for this deck. It's a legendary, which is something we want, and it's also going to synergize with creatures going to the graveyard. Since we're going to be doing a lot of sacrificing, we're going to be able to take advantage of this ability very well. Anger is another excellent card in the deck. We have a few ways to discard it, and we're going to be attacking a lot, so this should be able to give our creatures haste fairly often. Atsushi the Blazing Sky is a great creature to copy and sacrifice because it's going to give us a lot of value when we do so. It also works really well with all the extra combat steps we're going to be taking, seeing as it's got flying and trample. Captain Lannery Storm has an attack trigger which works very well with extra combat, seeing as we're going to get lots and lots of treasure with her out. She is fairly fragile, so we have to make sure that our opponents can't just kill her immediately. But yeah, it's a pretty solid creature and a good curve filler that we don't feel too bad about sacrificing later on to trigger Eomer. Dark Dweller Oracle is one of our many sacrifice outlets in this deck. It's not the best one, but we need a crucial amount of them, and this is what you have to resort to if you're in red. Delina Wild Mage is a really solid card in a deck. First off, she's a legendary, which is obviously great, and then she can make token copies of creatures. Note that the token copies aren't legendary, but we don't necessarily need them to be. If we make a token copy of Eomer with her as we attack, it's very, very powerful, because as long as we have a sack outlet and another legendary creature, we can kind of go off with this, and if we happen to roll the 15 to 20 roll, then she really becomes insane. Drakuseth, Maw of Flames, is very powerful in this deck because it has a strong attack trigger that is going to be really good if we have Eomer out, seeing as we're going to get to use it multiple times per turn. The same applies to Atali Primal Storm. This is one of our curve toppers. It's obviously a very powerful effect, and that has been so for a long time, but it gets much better when you get to trigger it multiple times per turn. Felden Ronom Excavator is not the usual Felden that you see in most commander decks, but he's quite good in this deck. First off, he has haste and can be very aggressive. The other thing you got to consider is our opponent isn't going to really want to be blocking our legendaries if it's going to kill them, because that's going to trigger our Eomer. So this should be able to swing through fairly unopposed. It can also synergize very well with stuff like Drakuseth by allowing us to trigger Eomer and triggering Felden's own ability. It's just a very solid card in the deck. Gimli of the Glittering Caves is going to get super big with all the legendaries we're playing, and Double Strike is really powerful once you get him big enough, and if he happens to deal damage to our opponent, we get 2 treasures, so that's incredibly strong. Glowing Dwarf Emissary is only going to trigger once per turn, but that's already good enough. Giving us a treasure every turn cycle is strong, and then giving us an outlet for all of those treasures that allows us to goad creatures should help clear the coast for our attacks. Godo Bandit Warlord is one of the best legendaries in the deck because it can search up some of our combo pieces, such as Blade of Selves. Grenzo Havoc Razor is going to make sure that if we connect with our creatures, we're going to be able to gain advantages because of that. Goading is again very strong in this deck because it allows us to clear the coast for our own creatures, but we can also just take some card advantage by stealing stuff from our opponents. Gut True Soul Zealot is a perfect fit for this deck because when it attacks, we're going to sacrifice another creature or an artifact, which is going going to allow us to trigger our commander very easily by sacrificing a legendary as it attacks. It also gives us a 4/1 with Menace for our trouble, which is actually a pretty relevant creature. Ilhog the Raised Boar is a very powerful card that offers us a lot of tempo, and when we get extra combats, it really gets out of hand. Kari Zev Skyship Raider is another excellent card in this deck because every time it attacks, it's going to give us a legendary token that we can then sacrifice to trigger our commander's ability. Do note that you will need a sacrifice outlet because otherwise the token is just going to exile itself. Karlach, Fury of Avernus is an incredibly powerful effect. I've been saying so for a long time and it's slowly creeping up in price. It's going to give us an extra attack step, no questions asked the first time we attack. That's great with all of our attack triggers, but it's also giving all of our creatures first strike, which makes them very hard to block. Krenko Mob Boss might seem a weird one in a non-goblin tribal deck, but hear me out. This is very powerful when we have our commander in play, because every time we're triggering Eomer, we're untapping all of our creatures. That means we can tap Krenko before combat, trigger Eomer, then untap Krenko, and tap again, and we're going to get so many tokens. We also have a lot of ways to give haste, and we have quite a few pump effects, which means that they're actually going to be very relevant in this deck. The other Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin, is also a very powerful one because it also benefits a lot from untapping itself and attacking again. It's going to grow larger and larger and make more and more tokens. Lelia the Blade Reforged is kind of filler. It's not the most important card in the deck, but it does do some decent things, like give us some virtual card advantage and grow itself little by little. Magda Brazen Outlaw is pretty decent with the couple of dwarves that we have in the deck, but even by itself, making one treasure per turn is very solid. We also have a couple of artifacts that can tap our legendaries to add mana, which means that you can get the treasures without putting her in harm's way. Morog Fury of Akum is a great legendary that can give us extra combat steps fairly easily. If you have fetch lands, definitely include them in the deck since they're pretty good with this guy. It's also going to buff our creatures for each time they've attacked this turn. We should be attacking a lot with Eomer, which means more damage. Professional Facebreaker is always a good card, and it's particularly good in this deck where we're making a lot of treasures. It can give us some virtual card advantage and provide us some mana ramp. Squee Goblin Nabob is a classic card that I really like, and it's very good in this deck, seeing as we're interested in sacrificing legendary creatures. It is a little bit slow, but it does always give us something to discard in our hand or to sacrifice. Squee the Immortal, I would say, is a little bit better in this deck than Squee Goblin Nabob. We can basically keep casting it from the graveyard and then sacrifice it and then kind of do the same thing next turn, so we're never really losing any card advantage. Tuk Tuk the Explorer is a pretty solid one because it's going to be a legendary that when it dies gives us another legendary token, so it's kind of two legendaries for one, which can really fuel our insatiable need for legendaries to sacrifice. Oribas the Hidden gives all of our team haste, which is pretty solid, but the other side is almost more interesting. Making our opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tap should really help us swing in. For artifacts, we have Altar of Dementia, which is a great sack outlet and can also allow us to finish the game if our opponent is really low on cards in library. Ashnod's Altar is a great way to leverage our need to sacrifice into more mana. Blade of Selves is probably the most powerful artifact in the deck and one of the best cards in the deck, period, because when we put it on Eomer and we have 3 opponents, you're going to get an extra 2 Eomer tokens, which are then going to see each other dying and trigger extra combat steps, and in this way you're going to kind of move past the once per turn limit because you can just keep attacking with your original Eomer as long as he isn't killed and basically just go infinite. Blasting Station is another good way we can sacrifice creatures. It's also very easy to untap if we have any kind of token generation, which we do have a lot of in the deck. Hazaret's Monument is going to reduce the cost of basically all the creatures in our deck, and it's also going to give us card selection whenever we cast a creature spell. We also have a lot of stuff like Squee that we can pitch to this. Helm of the Host might not seem like a great fit because the token it creates is not legendary, but hear me out, as long as you have extra legendaries to sacrifice, this is very powerful because copying Eomer and having multiple copies of him in play means you can basically go infinite with any other legendary that you can sacrifice. Heraldic Banner is a pretty good mana rock that's going to buff all of our team. Hero's Podium is going to make all of our legendaries absolutely massive and can even provide us some card advantage in a pinch. Honor Worn Shaku is a great mana rock for legendary decks, as is Relic of Legends. Lightning Greaves is going to give Eomer a little bit of protection and can also give our creatures haste in a pinch. Correction Altar is another free sacrifice outlet that we can use to trigger our commander. Spawning Pit is yet another sacrifice sacrifice outlet that can then be leveraged into creature tokens, which are always useful. Swiftfoot Boots is just like Lightning Greaves, a great way to protect our commander. And Urabrask's Forge should be very good in this deck. Initially, you're just getting a 1/1 with Trample and Haste, but it triggers at the beginning of combat. And since we're going to be having so many combat steps, this can be pumping out huge creatures very, very quickly and repeatedly. For enchantments, we have Barrage of Expendables. It's one of the weaker sacrifice outlets in the deck, but we need a crucial amount of these, so it's still going to be good. Brazen Cannonade is a card that I'm always singing the praises of. This is just incredibly powerful if you're interested in attacking. It's going to finish the game in a rush, particularly with all of the tokens we're making. Goblin Bombardment is one of the best sacrifice outlets in Commander, and it's going to pull so much work in this deck. Rising of the Day gives all of our creatures haste, which is kind of important because we have a lot of token generation that we want to immediately be able to attack in the next extra combat. Street Urchin is yet another sacrifice outlet that is attached to Eomer. It's just basically another version of Barrage of Expendables. And there I'm back again, fits perfectly in this deck. The first chapter is actually really strong by removing one of our opponent's top blockers from the picture. The second chapter is going to ramp us, which is always great, and the final chapter makes a really powerful token that happens to be legendary and leaves behind a ton of treasures when it dies. For instance, we have Bolt Bend, which is going to protect Eomer very handily. Kazul's Fury is a great one because it's a sacrifice outlet that can double up as a land. And then moving on to lands, we have Castle Embereth, which is going to be a decent land for pumping all of our creatures. Gaia Reach, Sanitarium, and Mikokoro, Center of the Sea, are there to draw some cards. Shunko, the Blood-Soaked Keep, is a strong one because we have so many legendaries that it can make combat very difficult for our opponents because they don't know who we're going to give first strike. High Market is a sacrifice outlet on a land for free, very strong in this deck. Inventor's Fair can gain us some life, and then late in the game, we can use it to search our Blade of Cells when we're ready to try to win. Mines of Moria can reuse resources in the graveyard to give us some treasures, which is always great. Rogue's Passage can protect one of our crucial creatures from being blocked, and the cool thing is that the unblockability lasts through all of the extra combat steps, so this is actually a really strong card in the deck. So Kenzen is just a nice land that can give us a couple of tokens when we really need to, and since we have so many legendaries, it's going to be very cheap. War Room is another great way to draw cards in a monocolored deck, and Witch's Clinic can give Eomer lifelink, which when he's attacking multiple times per turn can really add up. So there you have it. That has been our Eomer Marshal of Rohan deck list. I'm actually really excited about this one. I wasn't super excited initially, but as soon as I started building it and seeing all the synergies, I thought that this deck looked super cool, and I think I might have to put it together, even though I already have too many mono red decks. Anyway, what do you think about this one? Would you like to play it as well? Are there any cards that you think I missed, or any things you think I shouldn't have added? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.